Who knows what ideas and remarkable devices our world could have inherited if only his genius was recognized.
When J.P. Morgan prohibited Tesla from broadcasting electric power overseas with Wardenclyffe Tower, he said, I can't put a meter on it, therefore I won't finance it. That literally changed the course of history, and for the past almost 100 years, we've been suffering under that profit motive.
Of course, one could say that mankind was hardly ready to handle the awesome forces Tesla had glimpsed. The 20th century would bring world wars and technological innovations far more horrific than had ever been witnessed by Western civilization.
Well, free energy is basically, and another word for it is zero-point energy. It's energy that is contained within the vacuum of space and which is virtually undetectable by any traditional means. In fact, the energy is homogeneous and isotropic, the same everywhere, the same in all directions. And because of that, it's trying to extract it or measure it is sort of like the problem of trying to weigh a beaker of water underneath the surface of the ocean. What do you measure with respect to what? And that's been the physicist's dilemma, and we've gone down one very large cul-de-sac this century. The cul-de-sac meaning that there is no such thing as consciousness. There is no such thing as this zero-point field, or this place from which the energy can come. And the answer now appears to be yes, because theoretical physics and a number of experiments in quantum mechanics show very clearly the existence of this all-pervasive electromagnetic field called the zero-point field.
A man named T. Townsend Brown was busy on experiments that defied conventional understanding about electricity, gravitation, and propulsion. Along with Drs. Paul Byfield and Agnew Bonson, Brown took high voltage to the next extreme. In this rare home movie, the earliest experiments in electrogravitics are recorded. By using high voltages over 20,000 and up to 200,000 volts, Brown discovered that highly charged capacitors would exhibit a noticeable thrust in one direction. Although awarded a patent for his electrokinetic generator, no one has ever reproduced his experiment until recently. Larry Davenport, shown here demonstrating his replication of Brown's electrokinetic apparatus, explains.
But when I first began to read Brown's stuff, I didn't quite understand the difference between the ion wind devices, which there's a lot of them out there, and some of them are very efficient as far as producing ion wind, and his particular apparatus. I finally decided to do Brown's work in 1994. I looked at his device. I'd tried several different things and they hadn't worked, and I thought, well, Brown is supposed to be the pioneer of this, or so the people that make the claims in that get the patents, they always refer to his name. So I thought, I'll go back and I'll try to do this. Getting it balanced was real important.
His method of propulsion specifically was using the charge separation, high voltage charge separation on a vehicle. He found that circular craft were better for that application than winged craft. However, recently we found through Dr. Paul LaViolette's research that the B-2 bomber actually seems to qualify as an electrogravitic craft. The military has admitted that it electrically charges the forward leading edge of the wings. There's also a very high dielectric being used. Depleted uranium is used on the forward edge of the wings. And whether or not there are other applications for that technology and that design, we're recognizing that because the exhaust gas is also negatively ionized, that all of a sudden we have the high voltage charge separation that's necessary to provide an extra propulsive force, especially at high velocities. So electrogravity in that aspect is a very simple process, but does provide a good amount of force for a very small amount of energy input.
As with many other promising inventions developed during the Cold War years, The National Secrecy Act prevented scientists like T. Townsend Brown from commercializing or even publicizing any technology which could potentially be interpreted as having a military application. Utah inventor Paul Pantone has developed what he calls the GEAT fuel processor, a plasma generator similar to a supercarburetor that actually appears to run on 80% water and is entirely non-polluting.
This device replaces the carburetor and exhaust and combines them as one unit, whereas this end of it acts as a miniature refinery, allowing the engine to run on everything from battery acid and water mixed to crude oil right out of the ground. This is Angola crude, a 39.5 gravity. The exhaust coming down goes around and comes out here at the far end. The center chamber draws some of the heat from the exhaust, plus this tube takes some of the exhaust gases, takes them up into the chamber and bubbles them down to the bottom. The bubbles, as it comes through the fuel, are brought up to the top of the chamber, picked up through a tube, and fed up the center of the exhaust pipe. While they're being fed up the exhaust pipe, they are in a vacuum, and there's a heat exchange which occurs. This process has been argued a few times to be either a plasma field, an electro field. We do know that it does have a slight radiation, which is not alpha, beta, or gamma, and we do have x-rays to show that whatever is coming from the unit does get affected different from stainless steel than the regular steel. Yep. When the temperature of the exhaust is the same as the air temperature going in from the air portion up here, normally 3% more oxygen coming out of the tailpipe than there is in the air we're breathing. And no carbon at all.
Carbon vanishes.
I wouldn't say vanishes, I would say transmuted into some other substance, a lighter element, because we have an abundance of lighter elements here that are not explained from down here. But during the heat process, there are molecular changes. After running this engine from 1983 until now, and many times we had it running 8.5 hours a day, we have never had to change the spark plug, change the oil, or clean it. We have taken the head off 3 times to inspect the inside of it, and it's been spotless.
What we have here is the Pantone GEAT device fitted to a Ford 2300cc 4-cylinder engine. As you can see, we have a see-through container here which holds the fuel. As the engine is started, air is drawn in by vacuum through the fuel and bubbles the fuel, the vapors of which are drawn off here. They travel down this hose into our reaction chamber. They go up the reaction chamber and return back out here to be taken into the engine through this tube. This is our air filter, and this tube is connected to another valve which are controlled by this linkage, operating the air intake and the fuel intake. This is the valve that controls the return air going through this tube into the bubbler. During the testing with the 2300cc Pinto, we have achieved efficiency up to and including 300% of normal. If this engine normally got 20 miles to the gallon on the highway, you'd now be looking at 60. Our load tests and whatnot have not been completed, but we feel very confident that there's not going to be a power problem
out there that wasn't.
I witnessed the demonstrations by Paul Pantone, and I was astonished by the claim of ability to use any fuel or water, including mixed with oil and so forth. It's similar to something that's validated already by Gunnerman, that's being used in the state of Nevada at the moment. However, this is an even more shocking claim, because it appears that it is truly, if it's correct, and if it can be validated, he seems quite open, it appears that this may be yet another process which does some kind of transmutation of elements. He claims there's no carbon coming out of the exhaust, which would be unthinkable for putting a hydrocarbon fuel in, even if it's mixed with water. You have to get carbon out, and he's claiming that there are no CO or CO2 emissions from this, and there appear to be none visually. That is, there appear to be no soot particles coming out of the exhaust. So I hold out some hopes for this.
We are at a stage today which is the birth of the baby. We're not at the stage where it's already a teenager running around playing baseball on the baseball lot. We're at the birth of the baby, and the birth is very difficult because it's opposed by so many interests. The orthodox scientific community still very adamantly oppose it because they think that it's nonsense. They think that it's this old idea of perpetual motion in a closed system, creating energy from nothing. And that is nonsense. You can't do that. There are very strong and very powerful economic interests in the world, probably the strongest economic interest in the world, which are adamantly opposed to it. Can you see what this does to the oil-rich nations? Can you see eventually, can you see what this will do to many things? Now, actually, what it'll do, you'll phase the oil. Petrochemical industry won't go away. You still need the oil for the materials that's in it and the chemicals. And so it'll be more and more petrochemical industry rather than keep burning and wasting the oil and putting all the pollutants in the biosphere. So many things will readjust. It's going to wrest control from a lot of the great wealthy control barons who now dominate largely the economic world. And their world is going to change. Now, what you're going to see, I would predict, and we'll see if history bears this out, when those barons really realize that this stuff is for real and it can be made to work, and with the internet and with free publishing and computers and everything, they can no longer contain the information, and it's very embarrassing to keep killing the inventors. They stopped that about 15 years ago. At some point, you're going to see an overwhelming availability of funds become available. When the funds become available, the scientists will change over into it because they go where the money goes. They're bought and paid for, simple as that. You can't do research unless you got the funds. You cut off the research grants, professor gets without a job. He leaves the university. And so science is simply bought and paid for in this country and much of the world. When the money goes, the science will go to it. Now that will put the sharp young graduate student on it finally with some funds to do the experiments and work on their doctorates and so forth. You will have a very rapid assimilation and advancement of a totally new and extended electromagnetic science at the time.